Payment, Part 6, When Titans Meet. Bang! The third kinetic skipped off the floor to bury itself in the wall. Move! The Terran's PA system blasted from his helmet, loud enough to be heard even over the ringing in Kuvi's ears. Bang! The fourth kinetic was fired through the crowded Atlians and Desreti, punching into the door, impacting centimeters from the other Terran's head as he threw himself around the frame of the entrance. Bang! The fifth drove into the ceiling as the Terran's arm was forced upward, blowing out a light. The other illumination panels flickered briefly, then stabilized. The armored soldier gave a frustrated scream, bashing the Atlian guard in the face with the butt of his pistol. He stepped once to his left, raising his weapon again. Bang! The kinetic disappeared down the passage after the Terran. A swung blade caught the Terran just below the elbow. Then a second smashed into the firearm's barrel, sending it spinning away. He went down under a pile of Atlians. The younger Shriek roared again, taking a stride forward, sweeping aside the two guards who tried to halt his advance, heedless of their blades. A guttural bark from the elder stopped him. He bared his fangs, sending another growl toward the Terran before following the other of his kind out of the room, into the passage. A couple guards started to follow, looked at each other, and turned back. Kuvi smacked the cuffs into the wall again. His two crew, after hugging the wall as the Shriek exited the room, sprinted to him, Bulver taking the time to hit one of the Desret in the face with the non-lethal he was carrying. Mavic saw the vac cuffs, scowled, then knelt to examine the chain linking Kuvi's ankles together. An Atlian soldier slammed into the wall. Kuvi tried to jerk back, the chain stopping his step short and sending him sprawling backwards. The Terran was rising slowly, under the weight of Atlian soldiers and the barrage of blows. He had his arms under him, then one knee. Blades scored his armor and bludgeoned his helmet and shoulders, yet he did not fall. The weapons found no purchase on the armored plating of his suit. He ignored the attacks, instead gathering himself and reorienting. One soldier stepped in, driving the point of his blade into the joint of the Terran's bones. The weapon's tip jammed the articulation of his shoulder. The Terran's helmet turned, trying to see what limited his movement. The Atlian was too slow in stepping back. A hand snapped out, catching him by the front of his uniform. The soldier was pulled forward. Another blade smashed downward onto the armored shoulder of the Terran. He flinched, but did not release his grasp. Soldiers tried to pull the snared soldier back, or brought their blades crashing down on the Terran's arm and body. But the skeletal soldier did not stop, dragging the Atlian forward even as he pulled himself to his feet. The Terran headbutted the Atlian, smashing his helmet into the unprotected skull of his adversary, dropping the limp body. He reached across himself to snap the blade of the weapon jammed into his bones. With a grinding crunch, the shoulder's joint broke free. Then two guards and a soldier cut the Terran's legs out from under him from behind, and he fell once more. "Hold still," Mavic grunted. He pinned the lock of the chain against the floor, then used the butt of his stun gun to batter against it. The metal bent from each blow until it finally gave. It was manufactured for tensile strength, not to pass impact tests. Kuvi kicked the manacles away. Still had loops of metal around each ankle, but they wouldn't bother him. Atlians swarmed over the top of the Terran, on his back where he couldn't defend himself, pinning him down and kicking his limbs out from under him as he tried to rise, trying to stab their weapons into the joints of his bones and stomping his helmet into the deck. "Not going to get these off without a pass." Mavic tapped the cuffs. "That guard has it!" Kuvi shouted back. "Yeah, right. Gonna have to leave it on then, boss." Kuvi nodded curtly, then was hauled to his feet by his crew member. Mavic started for the wrecked door. Kuvi followed, casting a glance backwards to see Bulver following, stun gun at his shoulder, aimed at the brawl. A scream tore through the air. One soldier had managed to lever his blade behind the armor of the Terran's upper leg. He stabbed into the flesh, slicing through the hamstrings and drawing howls of agony from inside the exo. The Terran heaved, sending Atlians reeling away. He hooked his fingers around the arm of one Atlian, and the guard added his own cries of pain as the grip crushed the bones of his forearm. A wrench forward and a punch into the gut silenced him, leaving him retching on the deck. Mavic stepped in front of the door, reaching to open it the last halfway. He hadn't yet touched the handle when it slammed open with enough force to bend the hinges. The big Atlian was bowled over, sending him crashing into Kuvi, sprawling in a tangled heap. Bulver dodged aside with an exclamation. It was another Terran. Scarred armor, skeletal helmet with void dark face mask, the broken horns of a shriek warrior stamped on his chest in faded red, bones outlining his form in metal. He was fast, far faster than Kuvi had seen outside of a select few species. He cleared the distance from the door to the other of his kind in a fraction of an instant, hurling aside the first Atlian without effort, to send him sliding across the deck into a tower of haphazardly stacked medical equipment. 2 more soldiers were down before they had even noticed their new enemy. The third had time to curse before the Terran pinned him against a wall, driving the spikes on his knuckles twice into his ribcage. It was beautiful brutality. The Terran danced among his opponents, delivering crippling blows, throwing away Atlians like they weighed nothing. Dodging weapons and catching the blades he couldn't on his exo or armor plating. The Atlians were massively outclassed. No, that would imply it was still a contest. It was an annihilation. At nearly twice the mass of the surrounding soldier and guards, and with movements just as quick or quicker than they could react, there was no way to retaliate against this creature who couldn't be harmed through his armor. They tried to defend, tried to recover from their surprise and stand against the spectral Terran. But there was nothing in this room worth defending. They didn't break, didn't panic to flee. They retreated, backing away, keeping their weapons up and carrying the injured they could. You could fight flesh and bone, but how to defeat a machine built for war? The Desreti healthy enough had slipped out with the Atlians. Those 2 injured to move quickly suddenly became very convincing in just how injured and non-threatening they were. The Terran let them go, stooping to haul the other painfully to his feet. The injured Terran pointed urgently out of the doors into the hallway, in the opposite direction of the retreating Atlians. They were speaking, Kuvi could tell by the way the helmets were angled. Some kind of inner helmet comms. The second Terran started, then moved away from the other, skipping backward toward the exit, still conversing with the other. Then he spun, the motors of his bones powering his sprint down the passage after the Terran from the ship. Kuvi pulled himself from under the limp body of Mavic, gently hitting the big Atlian's cheek with the vac cuffs around his hands. "Mavic!" Bulver threw himself down beside his brother, taking in the gash on his temple, pressing 2 fingers into his neck. Pulse check. Breathing check, he mumbled, running through the quick battlefield physical drilled into their minds in basic. Mavic was already coming back up, groggily trying to rise and glancing around erratically. The Terran wavered on his feet, taking a heavy limp forward as he lost his balance. One arm appeared to be deadened, hanging uselessly at his side. The face mask of his helmet was cracked, the white lines showing like a spider's web across the surface. The blank expression turned to observe Kuvi and his crew, taking another heavy step as he almost fell forward again. The medical equipment was beeping their alarms, mingling with the moans of the wounded, and lighting panels were flickering intermittently. Broken electronics and broken creatures surrounding a broken Terran. "No!" Kuvi lunged forward. Bulver was pulling the stun gun to his shoulder. Stun guns used compressed gas to fire darts, carrying a one-time powerful electric charge in their capacitors. As they had slow muzzle velocity and only released their charge into organic material, they were regarded as safe for use in stations or ships, if highly ineffectual against armored targets. The first shot took the Terran in the shoulder of his dead arm. He glanced down, and Kuvi could sense his puzzled scowl. Bulver stood, advancing in a crouching sideways walk, pumping the next dart into the chamber. It glanced off the Terran's face mask, ricocheting away. The Terran twitched aside, the next dart just missing his helmet. "Come on, then!" Bulver was pumping the stun gun as fast as the mechanism would allow, sending dart after dart into the face mask. The Terran wrenched himself forward, painfully on his awkward gait. The Atlian didn't back down, teeth bared and continuing to advance. Bulver, anticipating the attack, ducked away from the Terran's first swinging fist, circling toward the injured arm. He yelled furiously, smashing the butt of his weapon into the helmet. The weakened face mask shattered, sending the Terran stumbling backwards, struggling to clear his vision. The interlayer kept the glass bonded, kept it from splintering into sharp pieces. Bulver stepped back and away, bringing the weapon to his shoulder again. The dart impacted the Terran's turned head, catching the helmet's cheek guard and spinning away. The Atlian grunted in frustration, moving sideways and closer to get an angle. The Terran lashed out again, spinning his opponent halfway around as his blow was deflected by the stun gun. Bulver recovered, circled again, slamming a punch into the Terran's side, into the soft material where armor couldn't cover without restricting movement. The Terran couldn't defend with his dead arm, curling over his side in pain and trying to retreat. The flexible material might defend against blades, but you needed hard plating against blunt force trauma. Bulver jammed the barrel of the stun gun into the helmet, through the damaged mask, squeezing the trigger. The weapon didn't fire. Bulver wrenched it back with a curse, trying to cycle the bolt, damaged from the Terran's strike. The armored creature seized the end of the barrel in his good hand. Bulver made the mistake of trying to pull it back. The Terran's enormous strength jerked the Atlian forward, picking him up and throwing him up to smash into the ceiling. The Terran turned, not even deigning to watch Bulver fall heavily to the deck. Despite the massive injuries, the skeletal soldier limped across the deck. The suit was no longer silent. Motors whined and a deformed joint ground through its range of motion. Kuvi backed against the wall, no time to dodge away before the Terran was on him. Besides, he wasn't going to leave Mavic defenseless. Kuvi blocked the first punch with the cuffs, twisting away as the force drove them backwards against the wall. The spiked knuckles burst the seams in the polymer, and Kuvi was thankful he had tried to free himself earlier. He was certain only the expanded gel sacs had prevented the bones in his hands from shattering. Kuvi frantically slid sideways on the wall, barely avoiding a wild grab. He retaliated by smashing the cuffs into the side of the Terran's helmet, and the restraints splintered, shards cutting twin lines down the Terran's cheek. The Terran's features tightened, eyes narrowed. Multiple layers of skin along one side of his jaw was scraped away from where Bulver had shoved the barrel into his helmet. His fingers wrapped around the front of Kuvi's shirt, heaving him off the ground and pressing him against the wall with the whine of his damaged bones. Mavic was dragging himself over the deck toward a guard. Kuvi fumbled at his throat with his freed hands. "This is not your fight!" The translator's apathetic tones layered over the Terran's natural speech. Blood sprayed from his lips with the force of his words, specking the shards of his face mask with spots of heat. "Tell your kind! This is not your fight!" Kuvi finally released the catch, dropping the object from his neck. It fell into the open helmet of the Terran. Mavic had reached the guard. He flared his head spikes and activated a small device. Jeki Rado jogged easily down the passage, his hearts scarcely raising their beats to keep pace with the Terran. John breathed steadily through his mouth. Although his top speed was pathetic, Jek knew the Terran's system could sustain this pace for enormous distances. Their kind had even made sport of it, attempting to push their systems into perfect adaptation for long-distance running. But they were slow and soft. It would be easy, so easy. Slip his claws up under the ribs next to the spine into the fragile organs. They turned a corner, Kulriktha leading the other two toward Docking Bay 4. Jek threw a glance over his shoulder. As far as he could see, the passage was empty. He hated Atlane stations. This species couldn't see most colors, so their homeworld's urban centers were all the exact same shade of uniform brownish gray. He'd been once. Their stations were worse, especially tiny, decrepit ones like this. Looked like funding had run out halfway through, so a hodgepodge of colors in no particular design or order marred the walls. They hadn't bothered to scan the construction materials to find out if they matched. Jek blinked once, opening his eyes to scan the hall with thermal filters. Still nothing. He blinked again. The Terran was running easily still. The sleeve of his shirt had been torn, showing the symbol etched under his skin with ink. The predatory, flying animal that was a symbol of his tribe, clutching a trident and an archaic kinetic weapon. Shriek earned their scarred symbols of rank and status. Terrans had to draw theirs on. Jek stared at the base of the Terran's skull. One slice and every nerve would be severed. But Kulriktha had ordered him to protect the Terran, and Jek was a good soldier. They turned into a large room lined with neat rows of seating and benches around the periphery. Along one wall ran a long counter where ordinarily customs officials would provide their services. Waiting rooms. They were provided around docking bays to allow passengers to get a lungful of the slightly less stale air inside a station if they were to wait or rest. There was probably some sort of cafeteria with cheap food and facilities around, too. He glanced around, disdain written on his face. Piece of garbage. The smallest of Shriek stations would have dwarfed this twice over and seemed luxurious in comparison. Through the waiting room's triple-wide doors into the docking bay. Finally a ceiling high enough that he didn't occasionally catch his horns. The hangar was almost twice as long as it was wide. To the left along the outer shell were the enormous outer doors, holding back the cold of the void. On launch, the hangar would be sealed, all atmo vacuumed out. Then the doors would slide open. Shrike Tech used energy fields to hold back the cold instead of blast doors. There was room for 3 small to mid-sized cargo haulers, like the one they had come in, laid out in front of him, the docking stations and walkways outlined in white. In the furthest spot rested an Astral-class freighter on its landing struts. Jack cast a sullen glance around the bay. Equipment was scattered around the edges of the white outlines. Refuel, repair, general upkeep. A few mechanized vehicles of some kind for cargo loading or offloading. Disready were clustered in groups under the freighter, leaning against the landing struts or sitting on the short ramp into the cargo hold. They noticed the Shriek enter the hold, slapping shoulders and calling warnings to one another. Kulriktha barked an order. Jek slapped a closed fist to his chest in acknowledgement, cutting in front of the other 2. He slowed when he crossed the center docking strip, swaggering forward and pushing the battle claws out between his knuckles, from where they resting along the bones in his forearm. Desready, stupid little rodents. There was an Atlian female a little distance from the ship. She was backing away, halfway hiding behind a skid loader, obviously sensing the tension in the air and unsure of her move. Jack ignored her, focusing again on the furry creatures ahead of him. The Shriek closed his hands into fists, spreading his arms wide and swaggering forward with his fangs bared. "Join or die!" "Yes, we join." Jack sighed heavily, dropping his arms. "Hornless cowards." The call had come from one of the grunts. He looked to the leader. The merc with the military stripes scarred into the fur. The Deseret held his gaze for a long moment. Jack felt hope stir in his belly, but then the creature looked to the sky, baring his throat in the Shriek sign of submission. Jack tried to squash his disappointment, scanning the faces of the creatures in front of him. Nothing. Pretty sure he'd have recognized the miserable little rodent that had speared him. The female? "Customs," the leader muttered. "Guards." "They left." "What?" "I swear on my son we did nothing. They ran off." Jack tilted his head slightly. Ordered to bring down a Terran, possibly. Seemed that the Atlians would be far too busy defending their station to bother with himself and these others. Jack wondered if he'd be waiting here for a long time. "Move everyone over there." He pointed with his claws toward a landing strut. The Disready obeyed sullenly. "My thanks to you, Jekki Rado." John strode past him into the cargo hold. Jack watched him go with narrowed eyes. Terran vocal cords were well suited to the guttural sounds of the Shriek tongue, though their accents mangled names. Kulriktha hit him gently on the shoulder, silently warning him to curb his anger at the small, dense creature. He followed the Terran, saying quietly over his shoulder, "There's a wing commander's shuttle in one of the bays." He jerked a thumb over his shoulder at a terminal. "Hasn't received any docking requests for 20 minutes. Jack turned, shooting a hostile look at the few dozen Disready. He idly wandered across the hangar, digging his knuckles into his stiff shoulder. To be fair, the medics had done a fairly decent job with the limited supplies available. The pain was more than bearable, and should heal well within 20 turns. Scales would cover his hide again within 40. A new scar, though one from an unfinished fight. Unfinished because his adversary was not dead. The computer hadn't received docking requests. Either no traffic was routed through this station, enormously unlikely, or comms had been crippled. Standard operation for Terran Spec Ops teams, another thing for the Atlians to deal with. He drew a lungful of atmo through his nostrils, sorting through the dozens of scents. Fuel, grease, metal and alloys. The smells of engines and cargo smelled like any other dirty landing bay. Musky smell of the Deseret permeated anything, though. He stepped through the triple-wide doors back into the waiting area, glancing around curiously at the deserted room, wondering if one of the chairs would hold his weight. He scented the air again, away from the disready. Nothing new. Nothing to fear on this station. He apathetically considered going back to the medical bay, throwing a glance over his shoulder at the ship. It had been far too long since he'd blooded his claws. But that wasn't part of the plan. He was tired, Jack realized, as he stood in the deserted room, without immediate orders for the first time in a long time. Not physically, but in his mind. He should have died a long time ago, on a moon many light years away. Died as a conquered foe, not as a running animal. There was the tiredness in his bones of a creature who had outlived his destined lifespan. These Terrans were brutal, merciless. When their enemy was defeated, they did not enslave and rule. They killed. They murdered. Mass extermination against an entire species. Now the remnants of his kind fled, scattering across the stars. Kulriktha hadn't allowed him to die at the sides of his war brothers in the ending of days. No, he had ordered him to protect a Terran. Ordered him to escape to attempted asylum and to drag the core worlds into a war of vengeance. This trickery and deceit were not the ways of the Shrike. They were proud, ancient even among the core. They stood alone, ruthless and savage in battle, more so perhaps even than Terra. Yet despite this, Jek's kind had always accepted fair return on their actions. No quarter asked nor any given. Harsh but just and willing to pay the price the gods would ask. Not like this. Shick. Jek stabbed his claws through a chair, piercing the metal frame. Though never before had the Shriek contested against a species such as this. And never in recent memory had the gods come asking of the Shriek when the blood had dried. Still it would be ended soon. Before long, Atlians would notice their signal dark station and investigate. And the Terran soldiers would do what they were built for. And the galaxy would rise up in righteous fury against this new threat. Because the Shrike, had asked for aid. They had needed help. There was no honor here. They had lost the war, and Jek was ready to accept the consequences, willing to give what the gods of war demanded. He glared back at the ship. Kulriktha wouldn't. Dare he say it? Coward. But Jek was a good soldier. A soldier who still had a commander. He tensed suddenly. He could hear the thudding of boots echoing down the hallway. He bared his fangs. He knew that weight and stride length. Had he gotten past that many Atlians? He ducked back into the docking bay, pressing up against the wall besides the doors. He could smell the Terran now. He smelled of metal and oil, stronger than the scents of the docking bay, and he smelled of his kinetic weapons. The steps slowed, entered the waiting room slowly, clearing his corners. They stopped briefly, then two more towards the entrance to the hangar. He could hear the faint hiss of the helmet venting Atmo as the Terran breathed. The others around the ship didn't suspect anything. Kulriktha wouldn't be able to scent the Terran over the musky cluster of Disreti. He heard a few more steps from inside the room, then the quiet sound of something metal being placed on the deck. The Terran had moved a chair. Then it was quiet, save for the faint hiss of the helmet venting. Jek suddenly knew what the Terran was doing. John had his back to Jek, bending over something in the open hold of the freighter. He was tempted to let the Terran take the shot. It wasn't a difficult range, even with a standard-issue kinetic. But he'd probably only have one chance, as the station's safety measures should lock down if the sensors detected anything moving at that speed in the hangar. At least that's how Shrike stations were designed. Who knew with this one? Jek closed his eyes, concentrating with all four of his ears. The hiss of breath came almost silently. Steady breaths. Then one deeper one. Jek spun around the corner, leaning forward at a 45-degree angle, muscles powering him into almost a full sprint in less than 2 meters. His three eyes began feeding the visual information of a 200-degree field of view the instant light arrived at his retinas. The Terran was kneeling, aiming a rifle across a chair at the astral class across the hangar, staring through his scope. Jek was upon him in an instant, sending the kinetic flying away to shatter the scope against a wall. The Terran was quick, far quicker than John's pathetic reflexes. He leapt up and back, the scything claws of the Shriek scoring across his chest. Jek wrenched himself to a halt, boots skidding, scratching his claws across the deck to halt his movement. He lunged forward, his 3 claws giving him enough reach to hook the holster on the alloy rod running down the outside of the Terran's thigh. He pulled, yanking the Terran's leg out from under him. The creatures twisted, angling his limb. The edges of the claws sliced through the soft plastic, and the Terran was free, albeit pistolless. Jack stood straight, sliding the pistol away with his boot. Pistol on the right leg. Right-handed, he advanced on the retreating Terran, herding him into the docking bay. The bones were all too familiar. Still grooved and burned from combat. Still with the broken horns stamped on the chest in red. The paint was fading, but the designs and symbols were the same as they had been during the war. Sacrilegious symbols of the Terran gods of death. Jack swaggered forward, arms flexing in anticipation. "You're quick!" The rough sounds of the shriek language tore through the air. "And you've been issued bones." The Terran was silent, still backing away in a half-crouch. Scratched into his armored shoulder were 3 parallel lines with another diagonally through them. He growled out his next sentence using a Terran word. "You're a devil." Some creatures thought it was these assault-class exos that allowed Terrans to rival combat species. Kulriktha was looking now. Let him look. No more running, not another ship. His orders were complete, they were in the core. Besides, he wanted to see if the Terran would play. He was quiet for a moment, breathing deeply. Then he began his battle song, a ritual embedded into the deepest roots of Shrike culture. A formality observed before every hand-to-hand combat, be it among younglings or the greatest warriors of their entire history. He selected only one verse, swelling with fierce pride as he considered that this could well be the very last of his kind, and against an adversary that had already proved his worth in the last war. He chanted of his birth in a volcano while thunder crashed. He told of his arrival heralded by gods performing miracles and the suns flaring bright. His story boasted of blood like drive engine fuel and strength that would bend hydraulic cylinders. He sang of scales as armored as the bedrock of a homeworld and claws sharper than a previous female mate's tongue. He spoke of a shriek warrior in full battle glory. When he was done, he stood still, hearing the silence. The Terran would doubtless have sent comms to the others of his species. Jack didn't care. Perhaps one last fight before enough reinforcements came that he joined his war brothers gone before. Perhaps he lived to fight again. The Terran stood, watching him. Jack tapped his claws against his knee in anticipation. The Terran spoke in his own language, a good tongue for war chants. Jack closed his eyes and nodded his head slowly. The sentence structure was simple and vocabulary lacked complexity, but it had a pleasant beat and the words were appropriate. As I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I take a look at my life and realize there's nothing left. 'Cause I've been blasting and laughing so long that even my mama thinks that my mind is gone. But I ain't never crossed a man that didn't deserve it. Me be treated like a punk, you know that's unheard of. You better watch how you're talking and where you're walking, or you and your homies might be lined in chalk. I really hate to trip, but I gotta lope. As they croak, I see myself in the pistol smoke. Fool, I'm the kind of G that little homies want to be like. On my knees in the night saying prayers in the streetlight. They got the situation, they got me facing. I can't live a normal life, I was raised by the strip. So I gotta be down with the hood team. Too much television watching got me chasing dreams. I'm an educated fool with money on my mind. Got my 10 in my hand and a gleam in my eye. I'm a low-down gangsta set trippin' banger. And my homies is down, so don't arouse my anger, fool. Death ain't nothing but a heartbeat away. I'm living life do or die, what can I say? I'm 23 now, but will I live to see 24? The way things is going, I don't know. Jack felt his hearts beating faster. He felt the stimulants pumping through his veins. It is a good day to fight. The Terran nodded once. It is a good day to fight, he returned. The Terran's bones mirrored his movements as he crouched lower, storing potential energy for any movement. His blade slid out along his forearms, following the run of his ulna, the alloy spikes appearing along his knuckles as he bent his fingers into fists. Jack bared his fangs, letting the rumbling growl spill from his mouth. His claws slid out again with the grating shick. The shirt stretched across his shoulders as his muscles flexed. His horns added even more to his massive height. The Terran barely reached his chest. Jack lowered his head, the second set of horns curving down his jawline extending past his chin to point at the armored creature. Jack was a good soldier. And a species built for war will never match one born for it.